Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. There is something joyous and somehow meditative about riding a bike. Whether that's a gravel road surrounded by nature, an early morning climb to a high mountain pass, or maybe just getting the blood moving on a morning commute, cycling can be addictive. So I'm excited to talk all things cycling today with Peter Flax, former editor-in-chief of Bicycling Magazine, Runner's World, and Backpacker, and author of Live to Ride, a new book that is a beautiful ode to cycling that will educate and inspire you. Hi, Peter. Welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here, and I appreciate that beautiful intro.
Now, you've written this wonderful book about cycling. You've also commuted over 40,000 miles to and from your job in the last decade. What ignited your love of cycling?
Well, I've been riding my whole life. I've ridden all over the world, and so for me, it's like a really meaningful thing that transcends something like a hobby. It's really like a lifestyle for me. And I think for a lot of people who ride, they realize there's something really deep and meaningful, just like people who would get really into meditation or gardening, that becomes this almost spiritual thing to ride.
And so if there's a listener who maybe likes going for an occasional bike ride, but doesn't experience, what you're describing, this kind of the Zen moment, when did you start getting that feeling of, boy, this is something more than just a way to get around or to have some exercise. This is part of who I am and how I live.
Yeah, I think it happened slowly, almost imperceptibly. I remember being a kid and thinking that a bike was this incredible way to expand my circle, to explore beyond my neighborhood. But over the decades since then, it's, just happened slowly. Like, I've done so many different kinds of riding. I had like a phase where I was racing. I had a phase where I was really into bike touring, and now I mostly commute on my bike. And that as those experiences grow, you realize just all the different ways that riding a bike can make your life better.
It's funny, you mentioned commuting. You've done an incredible amount of commuting. It makes my 40-minute ride seem like nothing. But do you think there's something about just that frequency, getting on the bike in the morning, you're still a bit tired, the air is crisp, you have this time, most of us just rush right into our day. Whereas on a bike, to start your day with 30 or 40 minutes without, emails or text messages or meetings, do you think that, maybe it's part of the aspect of how cycling can really, really benefit us?
Yeah, I think for me, it's been really meaningful. I live in Los Angeles, and so the drive from where I live to where I work really sucks. And so for me, it becomes this way to start and end my work days where I'm thinking and I'm like out and I'm seeing and smelling and hearing things. I almost always show up to work with one or two ideas that just popped into my head. And, maybe it's not for everyone, but for me, it's just a beautiful way to start and end my work day. And when I sit down at my desk, I'm like fired up to go because I've just in a really good headspace.
It's funny you mentioned that. On my ride home, often I'll stop and send myself an email because I'll solve the problem that I've been struggling with all day. And it's kind of like sometimes I'll stop 3 or 4 times on the path on the way home. It's like, oh, wait, here's the answer. And it's kind of crazy that you can work on something all day. And then, 10 minutes into your bike ride, it's solved.
Yeah, there's something about just spinning your legs that is meditative and cleansing. And I know from talking to hundreds of people who do that kind of riding that they also have ideas pop into their head. Certainly you can get that same feeling from going for a hike. There are other ways to do it, but riding a bike and combining it with your commute is like really time effective way to get that kind of headspace.
Your book focuses on the shared reasons people ride. And so we've talked about a few of them, but are there some other reasons when you were, researching your book and talking to people that kind of came out again and again as, hey, this is why I get on my bike all the time?
Yeah, it definitely came up, and historically, in bike culture, people have felt like they belong to a subculture where depending on what kind of bike they sit on and what clothes they wear, they'd be like, oh, I'm a mountain biker, or I'm a bike racer, or I'm a commuter. And what I have found from talking to people and thinking about this is that there's just way more in common than people realize, that we all want to be connected to the natural world. We all are trying to express ourselves when we're riding. We all want that sort of thrill that comes from moving fast on a bike. And so those like connective things are what drive each chapter in the book, to show people that no matter what kind of rider they think they are, they have a lot in common with everyone who rides.
Now, I mentioned in the intro, you were the editor-in-chief of Bicycling Magazine, Runner's World, and Backpacker. So 3 kind of seminal, different outdoor magazines. How do cyclists, backpackers, and runners differ in their approach to the outdoors, or what do they share in common as to why they're all drawn to these different activities?
Yeah, I think in my mind, they're coming together to be more similar. That when I was at Backpacker, I feel like bike culture was really different. But now, as you might know, like bike packing has gotten really popular. Gravel riding has gotten really popular. And in the same way, like running culture always seemed like a bit more inclusive than bike culture. The way you could show up even to the New York Marathon, and the people who were going to walk part of the way and the pros were lining up together, and bike racing has always been like everybody's separate with people of their ability. And so I see bike culture moving closer to the way running and hiking culture are, being more inclusive and more welcoming, which is a really positive thing. Like riding has always been beautiful, but maybe in the past there's been a thread of elitism running through a lot of spaces in bike culture, and I see that changing.
It's definitely, I just notice, I'm based in Western Canada, and I just notice every year more and more people riding bikes. And it's definitely, e-bikes have brought a bunch of people into cycling that never had a bike. And it makes me think of when digital cameras came out. All of a sudden I knew dozens of people that had never had a camera, never wanted a camera. They became photographers. And I see the same thing now, that I'd guess half of the bikes on the pathways I've seen this year are e-bikes. And these are people that don't appear like they were hardcore cyclists. They've just discovered, here's a fun way to get outside, get some fresh air, and it's a bit easier than having to ride a bike. Are you seeing the same thing where you are down in the States?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's I'd say almost everywhere in North America, with the possible exception of New York, which has had some real challenges with e-bikes. But in general, it's like a gateway drug to the experience of riding. It's, for a lot of people, it's a great way to commute or run errands. Certainly in places where people are on dirt, that e-mountain bikes and e-gravel bikes have given just a like exponentially larger group of people a chance to like see these wild places that may have been out of reach before. It means you can commute to a job and wear jeans and walk into your office not being sweaty or needing a shower. They're really transformative, and they're also going to impact safety for everyone, because the more people who ride, the more infrastructure there's going to be, the more just there's strength in numbers in bike culture. And so I think e-bikes are a fantastic development.
I tried my first e-bike last year, and what surprised me is, okay, it's a fun bike, but it's just a totally viable way to get around. And here in Canada, it's tough because we have snow on the ground for 6 months a year. But I thought if I lived in a climate without snow, I would get rid of one of my cars and just have an e-bike, because anything within about 10 kilometers, it's just so easy. Get on your e-bike, you get some fresh air. Is that actually happening in parts of America where you see people that are just ditching a car because now an e-bike allows them to kind of do all these short trips that, they don't need the full four person car to do.
Yeah, I see that happening a lot. I think, especially in like the sort of sprawling Western cities where the weather is good and things are a little further apart than they might be, say, on the East Coast or the Midwest. And I see tons of people with like cargo e-bikes where you see people going to Whole Foods or to Home Depot and running errands, and they realize that for things that are less than 10 kilometers away, that there's no time penalty to using an e-bike. You're like valet parking right in front of whatever store you want to go in, and it's just so easy and fun, right? Like circling a parking lot looking for a space is not that fun. And so it really, it doesn't have to be for everyone, but for a lot of people, it winds up being a great alternative to driving around in an SUV.
I love the valet parking. Yeah, it's true. You just drive, you ride right up, you put your bike, put the lock on, and you get at it.
Yeah.
There's a quote in the book that resonated with me, and it goes, "Modern life can be overwhelming. So many of us are consumed with work and family obligations. We are digitally immersed nearly every waking moment. There are video meetings and traffic jams and crowded supermarkets and endless emails. Many of us struggle to take proper vacations or find meditative moments or even unplug for an hour or two a day. And so taking a bike ride in a place where we are surrounded by sky and trees and have the sun on our back is more than training or recreation, it's healing." And that is the best explanation of kind of what spending time outdoors, if I'm backpacking or hiking or cycling, really is. The book goes on to talk a little bit about the science behind how cycling heals us. This is something that a lot of people kind of don't believe, that time outdoors can help, especially if they don't spend time outdoors. Can you maybe talk a bit of how cycling can heal somebody, physically or mentally?
Yeah, I think for people that do activities like riding, like hiking, like trail running, they already like instinctively know these things are true, but there is science that, seeing the green of trees and the blue of a sky puts in motion some biochemistry that is quite real, and that like the experience of riding specifically and getting to someplace that's quieter, where all of your obligations are set aside for some amount of time, is very therapeutic, right? That people who ride know this, and that for people who don't ride, they should know this. And it doesn't, like, riding isn't the only way to get it. And I think people just need to like find the activities that work for their lives and their bodies. But even just like you can be in New York City and do some laps in Central Park, which on a summer night, tens of thousands of people do. It's like magic how spending a little bit of time outside and pedaling a bike can just change your mindset completely.
Yeah, no, it is just a wonderful way to get out and explore. Your book has some incredible bike journeys described. And I think there's lots of people who, they'll go for a bike ride on a Saturday morning, but have never thought about cycling as, a way to travel, a way to explore the world. Why do you think the bicycle is an ideal way to travel and explore?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one way I like to think about it is when you drive and you're in a comfortable car and you're looking out the window, it can feel like you're watching a movie. And when you're riding a bike, it feels like you're in the movie, right? Like that you smell fresh cut grass, you hear the voices of people around you or birds, you just like, and here in Los Angeles, I hear all the languages of the people who live here. I smell the taco trucks. It's like so visceral that it just it can fill your senses in a way that other activities can't. And so it's like magical in the way that you're doing that, and you're getting exercise, and you're doing something that's good for the environment, and say in my case, your case, getting to work. It can solve so many needs that we have at the same time. And so it's really, really potent, which is why I think it's grown so much in recent years.
Now, a lot of people don't know where to start when it comes to going on a bike trip. And so are there a couple that you've done or you've written about that you think, hey, these are really special places that for someone to kind of dip their toe in the water, or maybe someone who even, is an ardent cyclist that may not know of, but what are some really spectacular trips that you think people should consider?
Yeah, it's one mantra I have in general, and it's in the book, is if you're riding a bike, you're doing it right. This whole idea that there's not like one way to be a proper rider, and so I think when someone's looking for a trip, they also just have to think about like what fits with their life and their riding style. Like I once rode from Seattle to New York with my best childhood friend, and that was the greatest adventure I've ever been on. And I would totally encourage that to people who the idea of like riding from the Pacific to Atlantic, if that sounds like fun, that's a great thing. For a lot of other people, it might just be, somewhere they can ride from their front door that's like they've never been to on a bike. Like I here in Los Angeles, I've recently have gotten into looking at all the train lines, and rather than doing a loop that begins and ends at my house, is just to ride in one direction and then take a train home, just so I can have the experience of being someplace I haven't ridden before. And I think that goes back to childhood of just discovering new places. And I think people will, in general, find that really rewarding at whatever scale works for their lives.
Now, cycling is changing a lot. We've talked a little bit about the change that we've seen, but, you've spent your career, writing about the outdoors, thinking about these topics. 20 years from now, how do you see cycling being different from how it is now?
I think the main thing is that in cities, there's this slow progress to get more infrastructure that makes more people feel safe riding. And so every time I travel a lot for work, and every time I go to cities in North America, I'm like, oh, Chicago, this is better than the last time I was here. And I wish it was happening faster, but there are more bike lanes, and specifically protected bike lanes going in places. And you just see like a broader demographic getting out and riding. So I think 20 years from now, that a lot of North American cities will more resemble what a lot of European cities are like now, where riding is exponentially more popular, and people use it as an effective and fun way to get around all the time. And so I do think that's the transformation that will happen in our lifetimes.
It makes me wonder, and I've never really understood, there's a strong pushback against cycling. And, I know here where I am in Calgary, they put in cycle lanes, which, they just took half a road or a lane and just put some pylons up so bikes can go on there. It's, fairly, it costs a few $1 million, a fairly minimal impact. But there seems to be some aspect of part of society that really hate people cycling. And, you've been all over. Do you understand why some people seem to be so against cycling? They're not being forced to ride their bike, but they just seem to be really upset by people riding their bike.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've grappled with for a long time. I mean, a lot of people don't like change, and a lot of people are just, even if they don't realize it, they're just kind of trapped in a lifestyle that, like here in a place like Los Angeles, people feel like there's no alternatives to getting around other than driving, and so they have this love-hate feeling about what they're doing. And so anytime someone proposes a bike lane, it feels like someone is trying to make their lives more difficult, that they're having to like cede this valuable space to people that are like hobbyists. And so over time, there's like data that you build that infrastructure and more people ride or take buses, and then there's fewer people driving to create traffic. But that in the short term, I feel like it's unfriendly competition in a lot of people's minds. And something else to worry about too, like when you're driving now, you don't want to have to worry about like looking out for people doing things that you could pose a risk to. So and like now, everyone's got mobile phones and screens in their cars, and so that's scary too.
Last question. Is there a favorite story from the book that you just found compelling to learn about or write about that can maybe inspire some of the listeners?
Yeah, there's I have a history element in every chapter, and I did one piece about these 4 women who were track racing legends in like the 1890s. And a lot of people may not realize that the history of like women in bike racing goes back that far. And, the bicycle has been this kind of device of emancipation for a lot of different people over the decades. And the sense that these women were pioneers in this way was really inspiring to me. They're just so badass because they were not only fast, but they were wearing like performance apparel, which was really controversial at their time. And so I'm always fascinated by how bike culture becomes like a vessel for all these cultural changes that are happening in our society. I think that story was great.
If people want to find your book, where can they get it?
Well, the book is called Live to Ride. Everyone that sells books either sells it or can sell it. I mean, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and tons of independent booksellers either have it or will special order it for people. It's, if you Google it, you can get it in 2 minutes.
And it's a beautiful book. It's the type of book, if you know someone who loves cycling, a great book, with wonderful photos. So kind of I think it's great to read, but also a great gift if, somebody who has everything, here's a way to inspire them with a book with some great history, tips, ideas, and photos.
I appreciate that. It's definitely, I think, has that gifty or coffee table vibe that people would want to leave out in the living room to have them and their friends look at.
Definitely. Well, thanks for coming on the show today, Peter, and talking about your book. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks.
Excellent. I'll put links to Peter's book in the show notes, and thanks to all of you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like or a comment. And with that, we'll be back next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures on the 10 Adventures podcast. Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.